If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description. Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200 plus audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.
Chapter 21, Scammer. He paused, wanting to ask if he could send her a friend request, but she turned around and started off. Take care of yourself, she said over her shoulder with a wave. Stay safe, all right. And you? After parting ways, Toyo quickly made his way to the fur trader and sold the wolf pelts for a decent price. He knew he probably could have haggled a bit longer and made a few extra coins, but with over 500 COL now in his inventory, a few extra didn't seem like much. Besides, he was in a hurry, he still had to meet Jay at the blacksmith's to repair their gear, and then they would have to run if they wanted a corner for the night at Alara's sanctuary. With 500 extra COL, we could easily pay the tithe in advance for the next month. Or... He thought back on the look Naomi had given him when she saw his worn-out beginner sword. I need a new weapon. Bad. There you are, Jay said in annoyance when Israel finally stopped in front of the smithy shop. Where have you been? The place is about to close, and we still need to get back to Alara's. Sorry, Angry shouts broke out suddenly from inside the blacksmith's shop, and a second later, the door swung open and out stormed none other than Naomi. Her face was flushed with anger, but the moment she met Toyo's eyes, she blinked in puzzlement. Toyo? This was a faster reunion than I expected. Jay glanced from her to Toyo in confusion but said nothing. Toyo smiled at her. Looks like we were both heading towards the same place. Is this your brother, then? He nodded, but before he could reply, Jay extended a hand in greeting. Jay Kamizaki. Nice to meet you. She took the hand. Naomi. And same to you. The beta tester seemed to suddenly remember where they were, for she gestured back at the smithy she had stormed out of and in a bitter tone said, I hope for your sakes you guys weren't planning on wasting money here. Jay frowned. Actually, we both thought this was one of the cheaper places around. The armorers around the plaza are pretty steep. Naomi stifled back a cough of irritation. It may seem like that, but that's because of the cheap bastard inside. He's selling lower quality items than the other shops and charging more than what they're worth, all while carefully keeping his prices just below what the others charge honestly for quality gear. I wanted to buy an axe here and the bastard just tried to sell me one with only 3 durability left on it. An axe? Israel questioned. I thought you used swords. Naomi nodded. I do, but I need an axe for a logger's quest in the forest I just took on. Have to get it done by morning. He crossed his arms and shook his head at her. Questing at night, and in the forest no less. What happened to stay safe? She smirked. Well, technically, I never agreed I would. You just said the words. Toyo couldn't help but grin. What kind of axe do you need? Jay asked. Any kind would do really, but I'd prefer a one-hander for speed. Jay quickly swiped his hand out in front of him, bringing up his inventory screen. I've got a one-handed hatchet I'm not using. He equipped the axe he had been fighting with earlier and held it out to her. Will this work? A surprised smile formed on her lips as she nodded. Yes, that would work great. How much do you want for it? Nothing, Toyo and Jay both said at once. There was a momentary silence as the two stared in surprise at each other. Naomi glanced at them briefly before breaking the awkward moment with a wave of her arm. I appreciate that, thank you both. But I wouldn't feel right just taking it from you two. It's fine, Jay assured her. We've been doing all right for ourselves these past few days. The axe wouldn't have sold for much anyway. He gestured at the smith's shop ahead of them. And apparently we would have gotten even less for it here. Chapter 22, Treva. Do you know of any cheaper places to get repairs and new gear? Toyo asked. The money you gave me won't last more than a few days, and now that you've told us about the scams going on here, we'll need to find a new blacksmith. Naomi considered it a moment. Well, there are a couple of cheaper places, but they're for level 1s and 2s. You guys need to stay up to date with. She stopped and snapped her fingers as if remembering something. She looked at Toyo. Remember what I told you about Tolbana? He nodded. The Traders Union. Yes, and you should still go there for that reason, but it's an expensive city to live in, so I wouldn't recommend moving there until you two obtain a more stable income. Fortunately, along the road about halfway between the town of Beginnings and Tolbana, there's a small, remote village in the foothills called Treva. It doesn't offer much and hardly any players live there, but there is a skilled blacksmith, and he's got a quest that makes it all worth it. It's a bit time-consuming, but not too difficult. Complete the quest for him, and the smith will reward you by offering a 30% discount on all goods and repairs. Toyo nodded slowly as he thought it over aloud. So not only will we be fixing our blacksmith problem, but we'll be considerably closer to Tolbana as well. Exactly, Naomi said with a smile. 2 birds with 1 stone. If you already knew about this smith in Treva, questioned Jay, then why were you trying to get an axe here? She shrugged. Convenience. I already did that quest and have access to the discounts, but I prefer to stay around the town of beginnings because there's a lot more to do in order to level up quickly. Teleporting from here to Treva and back every few hours would be cheaper, but also a waste of time. Besides, for now money isn't really an issue for me. Toyo couldn't help but be in awe of how well she knew and understood the world of the game. Compared to her, he felt like their first 3 days had been completely wasted. In fact, he was beginning to get the feeling that if he knew half of what she did, he and Jay would be far better off and considerably more capable. That makes sense, Jay said, audibly impressed. Your approach to all this is pretty smart. Definitely more intelligent than how we've been going about things. She quickly shook her head. I only know more because of the beta test. It lasted for nearly 2 months, so me and the other testers all have a good deal of experience on this floor and a few of the higher ones. The city's street lamps flickered slowly to life around them, reminding Toyo of the encroaching darkness. They would need to get to Alara's as soon as possible now if they still wanted some space. Naomi seemed to notice too, for she straightened and began to step back. Anyway, I have to go now, guys. I'm on a timed quest. She gave them both a smile. Please, stay safe out there. Both of you. She turned to go, but Toyo stepped forward at the last moment. Naomi. She paused and glanced back at him, waiting. I have to ask. Toyo cleared his throat and looked away from her penetrating green eyes. Aren't you scared? Uncertainty flashed across her face. She was quiet for a moment, but then slowly nodded. I am. Of course, I am. I'm pretty sure we're all scared. But I don't think we can afford to let that get to us. For now, all we can do is survive. Survive, and fight. We can't let Kaiba win. Take care of yourselves now. I'm glad to have met you both. With that, she turned on her heel and marched off down the street. Though Toyo tried to keep sight of her, within minutes, she was gone. Aincrad had swallowed her. Jay cleared his throat. So, mind explaining what that was all about? Chapter 23, Journey to Treva, Part I. Toyo ducked the first goblin as it swung its warhammer towards his skull. As the warhammer flew just overhead, Toyo launched his blade forward, his sword turning blue as he activated his sword skill, Sharp Nail. The move was simple, but a powerful and amplified stab all the same, and had been gifted to every player upon drawing their starting sword on the first day. Just as he threw his momentum into the move, a scimitar with a wicked curve came screaming forward, the slash aimed towards his chest. Toyo attempted to abandon the sword skill in order to evade the strike, but realized too late that he could not. Once the activation began, the system all but took over, forcing him to see it through to the end. Tearing open a cut along his chest, the force of the slash knocked Toyo back several steps. It was all he could do to keep his feet on the ground. Taking a quick look at his health, Toyo saw it enter the yellow zone. From just one slash? He suddenly felt that same rising sense of panic that he had felt on the first day. Cursing mentally, Toyo forced himself to focus. There were now 2 goblins just in front of him, both preparing to attack again. Raising his sword in order to launch a counter-offensive, Toyo was cut short by what felt like a shield being smashed into his back from behind. The weight of the blunt attack only drained a small amount of his HP, leaving him still in the yellow, but sent him sprawling forward involuntarily at the same time as the first goblin swung his warhammer and the second one lunged forward, the tip of his scimitar aimed again for Toyo's torn chest. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as Toyo realized he was about to die. He could see the 2 goblins in front of him, their disgusting green faces covered in ulcers as they snarled menacingly at him. Saliva dripped down their oversized jaws. Their eyes, bloodshot and red, stood engulfed in an inferno of delighted fury as their combined attacks slowly closed the distance. One blow from that overpowered scimitar had been enough to bring him to yellow, and now he was about to take 2 direct hits simultaneously, one being from that same weapon. Though he was straining with all his might to try and halt his stumble forward into the attacks, he knew it wouldn't be enough. His strength parameters were too low. He and Jay together hadn't been strong enough to move that boulder earlier. Still, knowing that this was the end wasn't enough to deter him from going down without a fight. He had charged in overconfident, but more than that, he had charged in to protect the 3 weak players that were all in the red. If he died now, without even taking down one of the goblins, those players would surely die. But if he could kill the one with the high damage scimitar, it might be enough to even the odds. Even in death, he might still be able to help them. Ignoring the bodily impulse to protect himself, to raise his sword in a futile last block, Toyo focused his need, his desire to help, into the tip of his blade as he let it drop down in front of him. His fall forward drove all his weight behind that tip as it whistled forward, directly towards the scimitar-wielding goblin's heart. With one final scream, Toyo took hold of the handle of his sword with both hands and extended his arms to complete the stab just before the enemy blows took him down. It came as something of a shock then, when the shaft of Jay's spear came hurtling down in front of him, followed by a deafening thud. The shaft of the spear knocked down both the warmer and the scimitar just as Toyo's blade reached its mark, embedding itself 2 feet deep into the goblin's chest. The goblin looked surprised for the briefest of seconds and then disintegrated into 1,000 digital shards. Without stopping, Jay pressed his sudden attack, dancing around Toyo as he raised his spear, knocking aside the axe of a third goblin as it went for Israel's back. Ignoring the shock of still being alive, Toyo immediately focused on protecting Jay before he too got swarmed. One of the 6 goblins was now dead, with 2 others still reeling from Jay's perfectly timed blocks. One of these was in front of Toyo, the other behind him, facing Jay who was now at Toyo's back. That left 3 who up to this point had still been focused on battling the 3 players, but Toyo had no doubts that they would now be switching targets. Chapter 24, Journey to Treva, Part 2. Narrator's POV. Without stopping, Jay pressed his sudden attack, dancing around Toyo as he raised his spear, knocking aside the axe of a third goblin as it went for Toyo's back. Ignoring the shock of still being alive, Toyo immediately focused on protecting Jay before he too got swarmed. One of the 6 goblins was now dead, with 2 others still reeling from Jay's perfectly timed blocks. One of these was in front of Toyo, the other behind him, facing Jay who was now at Toyo's back. That left 3 who up to this point had still been focused on battling the 3 players, but Toyo had no doubts that they would now be switching targets. The goblin with the warmer advanced, swinging his weapon wildly forward. Dodging the swing, Toyo gave up on the opportunity to launch a counter stab, instead of pivoting on his right foot, spinning out and around Jay while extending his sword behind him. As he danced around, the sword whistling through the air in a full circle, it slashed open the stomach of the goblin with the warmer, but not killing it. Not stopping there, Toyo continued to spin, screaming wildly as he forced more momentum into his circle, his sword wounding 2 more goblins who had been coming up behind them, sending them staggering back as he landed side by side with Jay, who was now desperately fighting off 2 goblins himself. Knocking aside the sword of one goblin, Jay swung his spear back to attack the second one, but he messed up the timing. Swinging its cleaver, it landed a massive overhead blow on Jay, dropping his health into the yellow as he stumbled back a step. Sweat beaded his brow as Jay again swung his spear, the blade hacking off his assailant's arm in payment. "Duck!" Toyo shouted, and without hesitation Jay dropped down. He could feel the rush of wind above him as the warmer swung past, just missing his skull. With a curse, Toyo grabbed hold of Jay's shoulder and threw his legs off the ground, kicking the goblin behind them in the face before dropping back down. Now he and Jay were back to back. All 5 remaining goblins now descended upon them at once, and the 2 brothers unleashed everything they had in them. Their weapons were a blur as they desperately blocked multiple weapons, all flying at them with incredible speed. But for every successful block, there were 2 more weapons launched at them. Tiny red shards swirled out around the 2 brothers as they began taking dozens of small cuts and stabs, and all the while, their health slowly continued to deteriorate. Within minutes, they were both in the red and neither of them had managed to get another kill. "We're not going to make it," Toyo realized in horror as he barely managed to block a thrust from a sword and a cleaver slash at once. "I was overconfident. Flushed with our effortless victories up till now. How could I have been so stupid?" Suddenly, the 3 players who Toyo had rushed in to save now charged in themselves. One of the players armed with a great sword leapt forward, and with a mighty overhead attack hewed the rearmost goblin in 2. The on-death explosion was like a banner of hope suddenly unfurled. With renewed vigor, Toyo and Jay began counter-attacking, their attacks now giving wounds back with interest. The tables were turning as an all-out battle now raged between the players and the goblins. One of the three players, a young man armed with a hatchet and small wicker shield, lifted both to fend off a cleaver attack. The goblin with the cleaver grinned as his weapon obliterated the flimsy defensive stance, and before the player could finish opening his mouth to scream, he was cut in half. The explosion sounded muffled to Toyo and Jay as they could barely comprehend what had just happened. Screaming in uncontrollable rage at the death they had just witnessed, Toyo sidestepped the enemy he was facing as he tore his sword forward, cleaving the air before completely decapitating his foe. Tears filled the eyes of the player with the great sword as he attempted to block an attack, but his weapon was too slow. Just as the goblin with the warhammer brought his weapon down for the kill, Toyo and the nameless player locked eyes. No! Toyo screamed as the tears trickled down his face, his open hand outstretched, as if to reach out to protect this stranger. Chapter 25, Journey to Treva, Part 3. Narrator POVs. Before his eyes, the player was cut down. The explosion was so close that digital shards flew into Toyo's face. Fucking die! Jay sobbed as he brought his spear down vertically, sending the tip and over half the shaft down through a goblin's mouth and into his chest. Without stopping, Jay tore his spear free as the shards flew outwards, blocking an attack from one of the last three goblins. It was now 3 against 3, and both Jay and Toyo were down to less than 5% of their HP. The goblin in front of Toyo went for a lunge, but he wasn't having it anymore. Without even bothering to parry, Toyo dropped to his knees as he began the arc of his sword from behind him. Abandoning its now futile stab, the goblin attempted to bring his sword back for a counter of his own, but it was already over. Launching his sword upward into a vertical uppercut, Toyo slashed the goblin open from its stomach to its brains. His hair billowed out behind him from the one death explosion, but he didn't even blink. Please! Screamed the final party member to their left. Before Toyo could turn, Jay had already rushed past him, his own enemy also now nothing but digital shards. Launching himself to the left, Toyo joined him. They couldn't let anyone else die. But before either of them could reach the stranger, the final goblin brought his warhammer down one last time. Please! The stranger's face was bashed in before he could finish his pleas. His disintegration was surreal, for both Jay and Toyo could do nothing but watch the shards sail through the air. The goblin with the warhammer had killed more than any of his pack had, and he now roared with laughter as he charged forward to meet the two brothers. Beyond words, Toyo allowed himself to cry freely as he took the lead, blocking the warhammer's strike. Switch! He cried. Fucking bastard! Jay screamed as his spear suddenly burst into a terrible green flame. Bringing the butt of the weapon crashing into the monster's jaw, Jay then slammed it back down, allowing the blade to carve open its face. Still not dead, the goblin lowered its shoulder to knock Jay away. Switch! Jay roared, and Toyo swung his blade one last time, cleaving off both of the goblin's arms up to the shoulder. With one final, hoarse shout, Jay plunged his spear into the monster's heart, finishing it for good. The explosion of shards went unnoticed as Jay and Toyo both collapsed, the tears trickling down in front of them. Their health bars were all but empty, but that wasn't why they cried. 3 people had just been murdered in front of them. 3 human beings were now dead. And they hadn't been able to save them. Neither one of them bothered to look around or get back up. Huddled together, neither of them had ever felt so alone and hopeless. Did you hear the news? Jay asked quietly. Toyo shook his head without taking his eyes off the small white rock he was kicking up the road as they walked. What news? Jay shrugged. Yesterday, when I made that run into the town of beginnings, I heard many people talking about a group of some of the strongest players who are planning on meeting tomorrow in Tolbana. He paused, craning his neck as he surveyed the area again. They had cleared the area so quickly he half thought to see some mobs they must have missed. Pushing his hair out of his face, Toyo silently equipped 2 slices of bread. He took a bite of one before holding the other out to Jay. What meeting? They know where the floor 1 labyrinth is, Jay said carefully, talking around his food as he chewed. Or at least, that's the rumor. They are meeting tomorrow to plan out how to get through it and kill the boss. Toyo lifted an eyebrow as he looked out ahead of them. They were on the road back to Treva, and all around them, the trees darkened as the shadows lengthened as if to warn them of the gradual descent of the virtual sun. Could be just that, rumors, Toyo suggested as they walked. Chapter 26, Travika, Part I. Jay shook his head as he took another bite, chewing as he replied. Nat, I ran into Malachi yesterday. He said the same. The info broker. Toyo's words dripped with distaste. I don't trust that guy. I've heard some things about him myself. Confident that they were alone as they walked, and weary of the wait, Jay swung his spear onto his back, the leather latches automatically clipping it in place. Though still not fond of spears, Jay had always been particularly skilled with quarterstaffs. He had spent several days searching for an item store or blacksmith shop that sold any, only to find that Cao had none. Still, he had quickly found that a spear could almost be utilized in the same style. Almost. What's not to trust? Jay asked as he opened and closed his sore hand. I mean, I get that he's shady, and charges a hell of a lot, stingy fuck that he is. But the info he's given us has been spot. Yeah, I know, Toyo interrupted. He waved his hand at the air, irritated that he couldn't quite find the words he wanted to use. I guess I could just be paranoid. I'm not the best judge of character. But neither are you. Jay threw up his arms in a gesture of surrender. I never claimed to be. But I hear you, man. He definitely is shady. You said that already. Sue me then. Though neither smiled, Toyo couldn't help but allow the tiniest smirk, the first in weeks. They completed the walk back to Trevika in silence, each in his own thoughts. It had been nearly 3 weeks since those 3 players had died. After that battle, and on the brink of death, Toyo had apologized to Jay for charging in blindly, for being too confident, but Jay had refused to hear it. I may not have charged in like you did, he had said, but I was just as sure of our victory as you were. We both got carried away. We need to remember this moment, no matter how much we don't want to. We need to remember that we'll never be too powerful. We could die at any time, against any monster. I never want to see anyone murdered in front of me again. But that day was just the beginning. Now, almost 3 weeks later, Toyo and Jay had witnessed 14 player deaths in total. It had been a slaughter. Thousands of players, finally finding the courage to leave the town of beginnings, were butchered as they tried to learn the game's combat mechanics and monster attack patterns. After the slaughter, it was discovered soon after that nearly 2,000 of the 10,000 players total were killed in the span of 2 weeks. The Western Plains, located outside the town of beginnings, were renamed the Bloody Plains, and the event itself became quickly known as the Massacre of Floor 1. During this time, whenever they saw people in danger, Toyo and Jay rushed to help them, desperate to not repeat that horrible battle with the goblins. Sometimes, they managed to save a player or two. But other times. But it was those first 3 deaths that clung to them the most. Those players had been complete strangers, and yet seeing them murdered there, in that pointless virtual world, had rocked Toyo and Jay to the core. Each death after that, while still a tragedy, had less to take from them. After those 3 deaths, Toyo and Jay did eventually reach Trevika. It was an easy quest, but they felt no joy when it was completed. After purchasing and outfitting themselves in leather armor and better variations of their weapons, and also renting a room at the town's inn, they then left. For almost 3 weeks, they had done nothing but fight, taking on stronger and stronger enemies every day, so that they in turn could grow more powerful. If they were strong enough, they could save those that needed help, rather than fail them. Chapter 27, Trevika, Part 2. Throughout the floor, players began to forge ways of establishing a community. A newspaper was published and spread for free at all item stores by a group of anonymous info brokers, who began keeping up with each day's occurrences among the other players. Jay took a great interest in this, but was frustrated to learn that the newspaper hadn't yet made much circulation. In response to the Massacre of Floor 1, a guidebook was also published by a team of beta testers, putting a halt to the slaughter before it could get any worse. The guidebook was mostly a detailed tutorial on how to fight in Cao, what areas were relatively safe, and the attack patterns of the mobs throughout the floor. Though neither of them needed it, both Toyo and Jay kept one in their inventories just in case any new information came to light. Winding their way along the small cobbled streets and wooden houses, they passed their room at Forgo's Inn. Toyo was tempted to simply walk inside and rest, but they both had full inventories. The blacksmith was located a little farther in, near the center of the village. Turning the last street corner to the blacksmith's shop, the 2 brothers braced themselves for another over-the-top welcome. Before they had even come within 20 feet of the exceptionally large bearded man sweating like a pig at his bellows, he saw them. "Greetings, friends!" shouted the NPC, the glee in his voice practically bubbling over as he spoke. I was worried so. Tears began trickling down into his singed mustache. All but dropping the sword he had been working on, he made to leap over his counter. Holding out his hand palm outward, Toyo raised his eyebrow and fixed the AI in a serious expression. The burly man wrung out his hands apologetically. Sorry, he offered, you've warned me before not to get so worked up. But I'm just so glad you're both alright. Yeah, Norin, Toyo replied as he and Jay began accessing their inventories. It was just another grind run, Norin, Jay muttered. Scrolling through his items, he added, we've picked up a few dozen weapons and shields. Care to help us out? Norin's smile returned, but the joy was especially evident in his beady brown eyes. Of course boys, of course. You know I'm always more than happy to do business with you. He began running his sausage-like fingers through his beard in anticipation as Toyo and Jay made one last check over their spoils before selling them in bulk. How about this shield, man? Jay asked. Toyo looked over at Jay's screen, squinting as he surveyed the shield before shaking his head stoically. Nah. Thanks though. Jay opened his mouth to argue, but decided against it and sighed instead. It had been nearly a month since Sao began. In that time, Toyo hadn't tried out any different weapons, or even a shield, to replace or accompany his one-handed sword, respectively. What's the sigh for? Turning his head, Jay saw Toyo now staring questioningly at him. Nothing man, it's just that I think a shield might help you out. Nothing wrong with a little extra defense, right? Toyo smiled. Is that all? Don't worry about me, Jay. Having a shield just isn't my style. I'm fine. Hell, my HP is higher than yours, remember? Jay crossed his arms defensively. Yeah, by like 2 fucking points. Toyo chuckled quietly before shaking his head. I'm just dicking around with you, bro. I knew that would get to you. Rolling his eyes, Jay refocused on his item screen, pressing the bulk sell button. Immediately after, it was replaced by a small screen showing 1200 COL. Not as much as I would have expected, he thought, but still decent. Turning to Toyo, he asked, how much did you get? Just over 1,000, Toyo replied. Looking over deliberately at Norin, he muttered, I had hoped for more. Scratching the back of his bald head as he furiously began to study his boots, Norin looked more like a child being scolded than a bear of a man working as a blacksmith. Kayaba definitely put some thought into this guy, Toyo thought. Chapter 28, Travaka, Part 3. Well, you see boys. Norin stuttered, I would love to give you more, but... Yes Norin, we know. Jay stated flatly. Moving on, Toyo said as he began looking at the wall behind Norin. I know I won't get anywhere with this, but is there any chance you have any new swords? The childish delight again filled Norin's eyes as he threw up his hands excitedly. As a matter of fact, my shop just took on a new shipment this morning. Toyo frowned. A new shipment? The fact that this is a game aside, there's no coast for miles around here. Hell, I doubt this floor even has a lake, let alone a... You're thinking about this way too much, dude. Jay interrupted. That's just the AI's way of saying we reached a level where we can now buy new and possibly better equipment. Alright genius, calm it down. Toyo focused his eyes on Norin again. So what's new? Let's see it, Norin. Jay stood aside and ate some more bread from his inventory while Norin showed Toyo 3 new swords. One was a katana, and the other a two-hander, but the third, a one-handed longsword with a solid 3 feet of sharpened steel for its blade, captured his interest. While the damage wasn't significant, it was still far better than the sword Toyo had picked up off a lizardman after his own finally shattered. Happy with the weight and feel of it after a few practice swings, Toyo sheathed his new weapon, paying the delighted Norin less than half the COL he would have paid the smiths in the town of beginnings. Waving goodbye to Norin, Toyo and Jay set off once more, sidestepping a herd of goats as they set out. I'm exhausted. Toyo said to no one in particular. Turning to Jay, he said, I'm thinking an arm wrestle. Whoever wins gets the bed. Jay pointed up the road a ways. Actually, he said, I kinda think we should check out the item shop for a bit. We need more health crystals, and you never when there might be something good. It won't take long. Toyo shook his head as he rubbed the back of his neck. You go ahead then, it's cool. I just want to relax for a while. He held up a finger in warning. Just know that if I'm the first one in that room, the bed is mine, no questions asked. Jay raised his hand solemnly. No questions asked. Upon reaching the intersection, Toyo turned left, picking up his feet a little as the inn loomed nearby. Jay continued straight ahead, already seeing the item shop growing larger in his view. Though it was called a shop, it hardly qualified as one. As Jay drew closer, he noticed that several new booths had been added. Other than that though, it was still simply a motley assortment of open cases, each containing something totally random. Ranging from health crystals to staple foodstuffs, the item shop was a convenient locale for things outside of the blacksmith's area of expertise. The NPC in charge of the little shop, a squat, middle-aged woman with graying hair and lips that seemed permanently contorted in a frown, paid little attention to him as he sifted through the wares. She certainly doesn't mind giving me the angry eye whenever she thinks I'm not looking though. Jay had just purchased 4 new health crystals, some rope, and several packs of dried meat when a familiar voice from behind him suddenly said, "Is that you, Jay?" Turning, Jay found himself faced with Naomi, the beta tester who had given them the tip-off on the blacksmith quest in Treva. At that moment, Jay wished his hands weren't full so he could fix his hair and put on his cooler-looking leather breastplate. "Hey, why Naomi?" he said, clearing his throat. "How's things?" Pushing her bangs out of her face, Naomi smiled as her hazel eyes appraised him. "I'm so glad you made it to Treva safely." Her smile dissipated as quickly as it had come. To Toyo. Comment. 1 comment. Vote. Chapter 29, New Member? No, Toyo's fine too. He just didn't feel like coming to the shop. She looked relieved but began shaking her head sadly as she replied. "I'm glad. These past few weeks have been horrible." She offered a grim smile. "But I'm glad you two have made it through this far. After you left I don't know. I felt unsure. I was worried I may have to lead you into danger. There are monsters around here that weren't in the beta test. It's getting harder and harder to be confident in what I knew from before when I keep finding things that are different." Jay nodded. "I understand. It's all good, Naomi. Is that why you came? To see how we were?" Naomi looked unsure of how to answer. "Well, yes and no I guess. I wanted to know how you were, but I was I don't know. I was scared of knowing. But today I was farming the monster spawns near here, and before I knew it, the sun was setting. Fighting in the dark is really dangerous. It's several miles to the nearest town from here, I'm pretty much out of COL, and I used my last teleport crystal yesterday. You could say I'm in a tight spot." She looked a little guilty at the admission, but Jay wasn't quite sure why. "So you needed to take shelter here in Treva. There's nothing wrong with that, Naomi." Smiling again, Naomi nodded. "I just didn't want you to think that the only reason I came here was for myself. I was worried about you too. Mostly because I felt slightly responsible for sending you off on that quest, but still. Anyway." Accessing her menu, Naomi equipped a one-handed sword. Though he only got a brief look at it, Jay could tell by the ornate handle and gleaming steel that it was extremely well made. "Would it be a bother to ask if you could give this to Toyo for me? The sword he was using when we met was absolute shit. I couldn't bring myself to let him keep using it." She quickly scanned the area before leaning in confidentially. "But don't tell him I said that." Immediately, Jay could feel a pang of jealousy welling up inside of him. That piece of shit. Not even trying. He talked to her one time. One time. And here she is trying to give him a present. "I'm going to kill him." Suppressing his annoyance, Jay smiled. "Sure, I'll make sure it gets to him. He's really going to like it." A thought suddenly came to him. "Wait, you said you were out of kernel. Where are you going to sleep if you have to stay here tonight?" Naomi shrugged as she looked around. Lifting her arm, she pointed to a spot in the corner of the street. "Right there probably. It's got a nice patch of grass." Jay nodded in irritation. "No way around it now. I have to invite her to stay with us for the night." "How fantastic! Toyo will be thrilled." "I'll kill him. I'll fucking kill him. Is something the matter?" Torn from his thoughts, Jay saw Naomi glancing uncertainly at him. Waving his arm casually, Jay smiled as he said. "Of course, I'm good. Listen, Naomi. I wouldn't feel right sleeping in a room while you're out here on the street. You can stay at our place if you want." Naomi looked pleasantly surprised. That's so nice of you. Are you sure? It's your room after all. Please don't feel like you have to, it would kind of contradict my gift if I'm being a burden on you guys. It's no problem, really. The room isn't the biggest, but it's definitely better than sleeping out here. Looking up at the sky, Naomi mulled it over. It does look like it's going to rain soon. Alright, if you're sure. I accept your invitation. Remembering the sword in her hand, she added, I guess I'll just hold on to this and give it him myself. Jay nodded matter-of-factly. Of course. Chapter 30. Closing the door behind him, Toyo didn't bother taking off his heavy leather boots or unequipping his new sword. Sitting down at a small table by the fireplace, he watched curiously as the flames sprang to life. In Sao, whenever a room was inhabited, the fireplace, as well the candle on the wall over the bed would activate. The moment the room became empty again, both the candle and the fire would immediately deactivate and die out. The mechanic was convenient, and offered not only light, but a feeling of warmth and security. After a moment of gazing into the dancing flames, Toyo caught himself beginning to doze off. Shaking his head violently, he forced himself to sit upright. When they had first reached Treva during that first week, neither he or Jay had slept much, forcing themselves instead to keep fighting as people died around them. Both brothers had shrugged off the idea of sleep, seeing it only as a waste of time. Sleeping in the game, after all, wasn't sleeping in real life. But they had been wrong. Though Sao was a game, the feeling of exhaustion was very real. The human brain needed time to recoup, and when it didn't get that time, it began to make mistakes. Both Toyo and Jay had taken more than a few hits due to the slower reaction time and reflexes that exhaustion brought on. That was what eventually convinced Toyo that they needed to rent a room, though Jay had been against it. Though they were spending considerably less money than most players back at the Town of Beginnings, it was all they could do to pay the rent each week and still have enough left over to repair their gear and buy health crystals. That morning, they had gotten a lucky break when they stumbled onto a treasure chest containing 1,000 COL, not to mention the money they had gotten from selling dropped monster weapons. Examining his new sword, Toyo nodded silently. A good deal of that money went into this alone, but it was worth it. Still, he was more than a little worried about the idea of Jay alone at an item shop. Ordinarily, he would have gone too, if for no other reason than to make sure Jay didn't spend too much. It wasn't that his brother was an idiot when it came to managing finances, it was just that he tended to forget how little they actually had on hand. Today though, Toyo was simply too tired. On top of that, he had something he needed to do without Jay seeing. Pulling up his menu, Toyo flicked through the screens until he reached his stats. Both he and Jay had reached level 9 that week, and Toyo hadn't yet applied the accompanying attribute points. A month ago, when the game started, both of them had agreed to put their attribute points into Constitution Agility. Each point put in that category boosted max health by 10, which was generous compared to most MMORPGs. Each general level up automatically boosted max HP by about 50, and with each level up, 3 attribute points were awarded. Putting all attribute points into HP every level, therefore, could buff up one's health substantially, and in relatively quick time. That was what Jay and Toyo had agreed. Instead, upon selecting his unused attribute points, Toyo chose Strength. Ever since the battle with the goblins, and witnessing those 3 players die in front of them, Toyo had begun applying his attribute points solely into Strength. Each point put in this category boosted damage by between 3 to 5 points, depending on the player's overall level. The murder of all those people forever burned into his mind. Toyo knew that while he couldn't have saved all of them, he also knew that some might still be alive if he had been able to kill their assailants. Because of this, at level 9, Toyo's base damage output was becoming considerably higher than Jay's, and it would have soon become noticeable had he stuck with an inferior weapon. That was why he hadn't hesitated at the blacksmith shop when Norin presented him with a new sword. If Jay's suspicions about his damage were to be aroused, Toyo could now simply point to his new weapon. Chapter 31. Still, that left his base health far below Jay's. That was why, 2 weeks ago, when Jay began to question his health dropping into yellow faster, Toyo snuck back to the Town of Beginnings in order to contact Malachi. The info broker had been discreet, but had charged a fortune that Toyo had yet to pay. 2,000 COL to be paid in 1 month's time, in exchange for the Amulet of Ares, a necklace that boosted the wearer's max HP by 15%. Thanks to the amulet, Toyo's health had managed to keep up with Jay's, but Toyo was beginning to wonder at what cost. All this secrecy, just to cover up early game attribute distribution. But it had to happen. If Jay knew that Toyo was neglecting his health, his means of survival, he would lose his mind. There would be no end to the arguments. No, Jay couldn't know. And Toyo had to continue. He needed to be able to kill. The faster he could kill, the more innocent people he could save. He knew Jay wanted to help the other players too, but Toyo knew his brother. Jay's first priority was Toyo. To him, the other players came after. Forcing himself from his thoughts, Toyo quickly confirmed the attribute distribution. In Sao, there was no such thing as a respec. Once you applied your points, there was no changing your mind. Switching to his skill screen, Toyo sighed. Upon hitting level 6, players unlocked a second skill slot. From searching to fishing, there was an almost unlimited number of skills players could choose from. Jay had selected detection that day, albeit after several hours of thinking it over. In RPGs, monsters would only become aggressive once a players came within a certain distance of them, but that rule did not apply for all scenarios. In previous MMOs, both Toyo and Jay remembered dealing with certain mobs that were designed for secrecy and stealth, and whose aggressive reaction radius were far greater than others. The purpose of such creatures was to add a level of unpredictability and excitement to the game. It was foolish to hope that Sao wouldn't have similar monsters. On top of this was the problem of respawning mobs. Hundreds of player deaths during the massacre of Floor 1 were attributed to monsters who had been killed not long prior by other players, and therefore absent when new players entered the area, respawning near or behind the unsuspecting new players. Taking these thoughts into account, Toyo and Jay both agreed that it would be wise for one of them to have the detection skill. The moment he selected the skill, Jay had noticed slightly sharper hearing and a higher examination capability when looking at monster levels. It was undoubtedly a skill that could mean the difference between life and death, but Toyo had felt like it just didn't suit him. Now, days later, he still felt the same way, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. He could sense that his first secondary skill would be of particular importance, and he wanted it to support his combat skill, rather than function on its own. Or maybe I'm just overthinking this again. He sighed. It's funny how in real life, Jay's the hesitant one, but whenever it comes to fucking RPGs, I take forever just deciding what kind of eye color my characters get. Shaking his head in frustration, Toyo swiped his status screens away. Standing up, he took a moment to stretch before walking over to the bed. Contemplating whether or not he should deactivate the light over the bed, he sighed when he remembered that it would simply turn on again whenever Jay got back. It's dim enough in here, I just need some sleep. Allowing himself to fall forward onto the bed, the soft pillow enveloping his face as he closed his eyes, the door outside suddenly opened, closely followed by Jay's voice. Get up. Get the hell out of here with that shit, Toyo interrupted, his voice partially muffled by the pillow, I'm not moving. So, do we have any money left or are we broke again for the 100th time this week? That's awfully cynical, came a familiar female voice. Chapter 32. Instantly sitting up, Toyo was surprised to see Naomi walking inside. Her light brown hair seemed to be cut a little shorter, but besides that, she looked about the same. She was wearing a boiled leather breastplate, coupled with 2 shoulder pauldrons underneath a blue shirt. Her black leggings complemented her long legs, and her leather boots, though muddy, looked to be a quality item. He couldn't help wonder where she was finding such excellent, not to mention fashionable, equipment. Both he and Jay had taken time out of their constant patrolling for players in danger to try and discover more item reward quests, but so far had had no luck. The light leather armor and simple clothing they did have had come from Norin the blacksmith. Naomi? What's up? Toyo asked curiously. He wished he had had time to check how his long hair looked today. Even as he spoke, small strands threatened to fall onto his face. Did you catch Jay stalking you? I told him not to, stealth has never been a gift of his. Clearing his throat angrily, Jay deliberately slammed the door closed behind him. Naomi smirked. Really? I don't know why, but I kind of assumed you'd be the one bad at sneaking around. Toyo lifted an eyebrow. And why's that? Naomi shrugged. You talk entirely too much. Before Toyo could reply, Jay burst out laughing. Hey dickhead, Toyo muttered as he glared at his brother, you stopped me before I could give her my comeback. Then I'll apologize, Jay replied, the humor still evident in his tone, by giving you the benefit of the doubt and pretending you had a comeback at all. Shaking his head, Toyo returned his gaze to Naomi. On a more serious note, is there something we can help with? We still owe you for telling us about Norin here in Treva. We've saved at least 3,000 COL thanks to you. And in this game, he added, I think it's safe to say that could easily make the difference between life and death. Stepping forward, Naomi shook her head grimly. No, I don't see it that way. The day we met, I was feeling pretty cocky. Being a beta tester, I felt like things were easier than they actually are. Not to mention the fact that a few days after I sent you guys off on that quest, I started to realize that things aren't the same here as they were in the beta. I mean, some things are, but lots of little elements are different now. She paused, turning away as she made her way to the corner of the small room. Leaning her back up against the wall, she crossed her arms underneath her breasts before picking up the thread of her narrative. It made me start to question how much I actually knew about the game, and what I could be sure of. I started getting worried that I had sent the two of you off into danger. And then the massacre started. Her gaze seemed to lose focus as she stared up at the ceiling. Toyo and Jay both understood. She had seen the massacre firsthand, just like them. So many players, butchered in the span of only a few weeks. At the height of the massacre, Toyo and Jay went out each day not just to grind, but to seek out players they knew would be in danger. On top of that, seeing so many die around them had begun leading them to expect their own deaths. It seemed only a matter of time. Both of them still told their jokes and behaved as normally as they could, but Toyo knew Jay felt the same horrific thoughts he did. Anyway, Naomi shook her head as if to expel the dark thoughts now clouding all their minds. That's why I decided I had to pay you back for getting you in danger because of my recklessness. Stepping over to Toyo, Naomi accessed her menu, quickly equipping a one-handed longsword of immense beauty. The blade itself was razor-sharp and made of silver. The crossguard was wide and composed of steel, as was the handle, which was also wrapped in coiled leather for gripping purposes. Chapter 33. Toyo found himself stunned at the sight of such a sword. He was even more stunned when Naomi held it out to him. It's for you, she said bluntly. Toyo looked up at her in confusion as she stood in front of him. What do you mean it's for me? Why? Sighing, Naomi brandished the sword at him impatiently. Toyo furrowed his brow. I'm not taking your sword from you, Naomi. Looking genuinely amused, Naomi flashed a look at him that suddenly made him feel like a child who had just said something completely absurd. I don't even use swords, dummy. I use an axe and shield. I picked this up after I beat a quest, and since I don't use swords, I was going to sell it until I remembered you were still using the beginner's sword. She shrugged. Consider this my apology for putting the two of you in danger. Toyo waved his hand, refuting the notion. You didn't put us in any danger. It was an easy quest, just like you said. You don't owe us anything, Naomi. You should sell it, you'll probably get a great. You either take the sword or I continue feeling like shit for what I know I did to you too. Naomi's face was stone. Seeing he wasn't going to change her mind, Toyo glanced over her shoulder at Jay. A little help here. Jay offered an apologetic shrug. I don't know, dude, I don't think she's backing down. I think you should just take the sword. Sighing loudly, Toyo gave Naomi one last look. I'm not going to be happy about this. And I'm not going to care. She replied cheerfully. He couldn't help but smile. I like this girl. Throwing up his arms helplessly, Toyo took the sword. Examining it, he could see that it was called Silverthorn. Lengthy and elegant, the blade had better reach than the average one-hander. With a considerable attack speed boost and dealing almost twice the damage of Jay's rare spear, the sword was easily the best weapon Toyo had seen so far in Sao. He could only imagine what kind of axe Naomi had that kept her from using Silverthorn. Holding the sword straight out in front of him, Toyo grinned at the perfect balance and weight. And then, just as quickly as it had come, his smile faded. Naomi frowned. What's wrong now? Toyo patted the pommel of the sword at his belt. I just bought this from Norin. Not even an hour ago. He shook his head bitterly. Such a waste of money. Naomi nodded empathetically. That's just bad luck right there. Jay, who was now sitting at the table with his stat screen up, chuckled aloud as he said, yeah, is bad luck in games is something of a legend at this point. Is. Naomi looked at Toyo. Is that your nickname? Trust me, Toyo answered, it's better than is real. Giggling, Naomi went over to the table, sitting opposite Jay. Silence enveloped the room for a moment as she accessed her inventory screen, taking off her leather armor and replacing her boots with socks. Finished with her adjustments, Naomi leaned back in her chair as she stared into the fire. This is a nice room you guys have. Better than the ones in the town I stay at. Toyo snorted. Costs a fucking fortune just to stay another night though. And it's too small. What town do you stay at, if you don't mind me asking of course? Jay asked. Naomi smiled pleasantly. No, not at all. I've been staying at Tolbana for around a week now. Tolbana. Jay suddenly sat upright. So you know about the meeting that's supposed to be going down there tomorrow? Naomi nodded. The meeting is for real. Most of the strongest players so far, around 40 or so, are going to raid the labyrinth and fight the floor 1 boss. Jay looked over his shoulder enthusiastically at Toyo, who was still sitting on the bed. We need to be at that meeting tomorrow. We can help them. Toyo hesitated. Help them? It sounds to me like they got it all under control. Chapter 34. Jay was taken aback. What the hell are you talking about, man? This is the best news we've gotten all month. This means there are players out there who aren't just sitting on their asses or are too scared to do anything. These guys are doing it, they're actually doing it. Toyo frowned. Doing what, exactly? Jay blinked in utter confusion. The fuck is your problem? Did you get hit over the head today? Doing what? They're beating the game, man. They're going to put an end to all of this. They're saving lives. Toyo looked away for a moment as he contemplated how to reply. It was clear to him that Jay saw the boss raid differently than he did. Look, Toyo began, I get why they're doing the raid. And I get why you want to go. I kind of want to go too, but... But what? Toyo ignored the interruption. I've been thinking about this since we started hearing about the meeting the other day. The guys who are going on the raid are the strongest players in the game, right? Right. Jay answered warily. That means that they don't need our help. That means that they can handle themselves, keep themselves alive. I mean, come on, 40 of the strongest players all together in a group, against 1 boss? We both know how easy it is to win boss fights when you attack with the multi-party strategy, and I guarantee you that's what they'll use. They wouldn't be the strongest players in the game if they didn't know about that. Tanks in the front, damage dealers on the flanks. Similar parties in reserve to switch out when the time comes. It's simple stuff. I'm not getting your point, Jay replied, his voice tinged with bewilderment. First off, you're right, it's easier to win against a boss when you have more people. Which is exactly why we should go. Second, if we don't contribute to clearing the game, what's the point of us leveling up when we could just go hide back in the town of beginnings? Just let me finish, would you? Toyo was beginning to grow irritated that Jay still wasn't seeing what he was driving at. Obviously clearing the game is important. I'm not saying that it's not. But I just don't feel like it's as important as human lives. Concern stretched over Jay's features. What do you mean? I'm talking about the people that are dying out here every day. Toyo tried to suppress the sorrow he felt from making its way into his words, but was only partially successful. The massacre didn't end. Sure, not as many people are dying now, but that doesn't mean no one is. There are a lot of people in this game, Jay, and most of them don't have the skill or gear that the players in Tolbana, or us for that matter, do have. Pointing at the door, Toyo continued. Out there, people we've never met are being murdered by this game. People that can't defend themselves. People that want to survive, but don't have the ability to. We need to be there for those people, not the strongest players in the game. We've been patrolling areas all over this floor trying to find people that need our help. And that's something that I think we should continue doing. We should help the people that actually need that help, not the ones that don't. It was silent in the room except for the crackle of the flames from within the fireplace. Naomi, who hadn't said a word throughout the argument, seemed to be waiting patiently for it to placate before she spoke again. Toyo didn't mean to exclude her, but the differing views between him and Jay had made themselves clear, and he needed to know where things would go from here. I see your point, Jay said, fiddling with a loose string on his shirt as he spoke. I get where you're coming from now. But I just don't think what you're saying is the right course of action. He looked up at Toyo, fixing him in an apologetic but determined face. Every day we spend not focusing on beating the game is another day, another chance, for innocent people to die. It won't stop until the game ends, I think we both know that. So why would we not focus our efforts to bringing about that end sooner? Chapter 35. Accessing his own menu, Toyo yawned as he began equipping his gear in turn. Don't worry about it, you didn't wake me. Oh, and, he gestured to Jay, you don't have to whisper. Waking him up while he's snoring is pretty much impossible. Believe me, I've tried. Naomi shook her head in amusement. Placing a hand on her hip, she eyed the door deliberately. Going somewhere? Toyo asked as he stood, stretching his back to shake off the dulling pain. A friend of mine just messaged me, she replied. He needs some help with a quest back in Tolbana. It's nothing urgent, so I was about to go eat breakfast first before letting you guys know I had to leave. She offered a cheerful smile. But now that you're up, we can both go eat. I'll pay. Toyo cocked his head to the side. Are you saying I look poor to you? She shrugged. That's neither here nor there. Although, I did happen to overhear you saying something about being broke again for the 100th time this week not too long ago. Sighing, Toyo shook the handle of Silverthorn at her before fastening the weapon onto his belt. I already owe you enough, no matter what you say. However, he scratched his morning shadow, I think I see an opportunity here. Naomi lifted an eyebrow curiously. An opportunity for? Lifting a finger through the air matter-of-factly, Toyo replied, to go Dutch, of course. That way, since both of us still feel as though we owe the other, we can both compromise and call it even. After this breakfast, all debt on either side is hitherto void. Sound good? Waving a hand through the air casually, Naomi opened the door, flooding the room in the full morning light. I suppose that's fair. Although, she added, come to think of it, I didn't feel like I owed you anything after giving you Silverthorn. So, following that rule, maybe you should be the one to pay after all. He stepped past her out into the street, shaking his head grimly. Technicalities are just the worst, aren't they? They could keep debates going on forever. Better to avoid them altogether, I find. Dutch it is. Rolling her eyes, Naomi couldn't help but smile as she closed the door behind her. There weren't many restaurants in Treva. As tempting as the smells wafting from each one had been, neither Jay nor Toyo had bothered trying any during their stay. Constantly trying to keep up their funds, they had limited themselves to eating only food dropped by mobs. At the best of times, such cuisine was bland and tasteless. He told as much to Naomi when she asked where they should go. The look on her face was one of pure disbelief. You've lived here for what, 2 weeks now? And you haven't tried any of the food? Toyo blinked. Is it that good? Well, I haven't tried any of the places here in Treva, she admitted, but each floor tends to have a particular theme when it comes to food. Toyo nodded thoughtfully as they began walking up the cobbled street. So what's the theme for this floor? Eggs. Eggs. Naomi nodded happily. Egg-related dishes are the main specialty here on floor 1. Which is perfect for us. Toyo held back the urge to laugh. Why exactly? I hope you realize how that sounded. I could have so easily said something right there. You're welcome in advance. God, I'm such a gentleman. The cheerful beta tester facepalmed dramatically. What the hell are you talking about now? I said it's perfect because we're going for breakfast. What's a proper breakfast without eggs? Toyo pushed a hand through his hair as he grinned mischievously. I couldn't agree more. Because players stronger than us are already working towards that goal. Toyo said firmly. Which means those same players aren't there to look out for the weaker people. If the best players won't look out for them, someone else has to. And that's what I think we should do. So then, Jay said slowly, we've reached an impasse. Looks like. And I'm not sure what to do about it. It was tense in the room for a moment as neither brother was prepared to back down. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, Jay sighed. Standing up, he wrung his hands together and yawned before replying. Well, for starters, I think we should both think it over. Maybe tomorrow, after some much-needed sleep, we can come to some kind of compromise. I hear you. Toyo yawned in kind. We've been pushing it with our sleeping schedule. Could be we're just not thinking straight. Either way, Naomi suddenly interceded, I'm glad that's over. It's awkward as hell being in the same room when you two go at it. Anyway, just so we're clear, the bed is mine. Toyo looked down at the mattress sadly. Oh well. It was good while it lasted. Toyo awoke with a start, the scream still echoing inside his head. He could feel the cold sweat plastering the shirt he was wearing against his skin. His heart was beating so loudly, he was amazed Jay and Naomi were still asleep. What the hell is wrong with me? Ever since the day those first 3 players had died, nightmares had begun to plague Toyo's dreams. Every death they had witnessed afterwards only served to add to his tormented nightmares. Opening his eyes, he guessed by the level of darkness that it was still an hour or 2 before dawn. Forcing himself to calm down, Toyo slowed his breathing until his rapid heartbeat finally began to slow. Shutting his eyes, he was about to doze off once more when the silence that permeated the still darkness was suddenly broken by the sound of a screen being accessed. Alarmed, Toyo's eyes immediately darted to the door. Was it possible that someone had broken in? While hardly anyone lived in Treva, Toyo and Jay had both seen several players passing through on multiple occasions. The door was firmly closed, and nothing could be heard outside but the faint rush of wind against the wooden walls of the inn. I'm being an idiot. Why would a player break into our room? And then he heard it again. Fainter this time, but still containing the familiar digital sound of a screen being swiped aside. Scanning the room, Toyo's eyes stopped as he focused on the bed. The faintest blue light emanated from underneath the blanket Naomi slept on. Straining his eyes, he realized that she was sitting upright, with the blanket over her as she went through her character menu. By her positioning, it appeared as though she had been sitting like that for quite some time. It's like 2 in the morning, what the hell is she doing up? Watching carefully, Toyo did his best to ignore his exhaustion as he tried to see if he could read her screen through the blanket. Opening his eyes as wide as they could go, Toyo forced himself to keep looking at Naomi. It was then that he realized the room was filled with light. Not from the fire or the candle, but from outside. Glancing at the bed, he saw that the blankets had been neatly folded. The bed itself was empty. Did I seriously pass out with that sketchy shit going on? Taking off his blanket, Toyo sat up, his back hurting from sleeping on the hardwood floor. To his right, Jay was snoring lightly underneath a blanket of his own. Oh, morning. Turning, Toyo saw Naomi by the door. Equipping her leather armor and boots, Naomi looked briefly at Jay before glancing back at Toyo. I didn't want to wake you guys, she whispered, sorry about that. Chapter 36. Accessing his own menu, Toyo yawned as he began equipping his gear in turn. Don't worry about it, you didn't wake me. Oh, and, he gestured to Jay, you don't have to whisper. Waking him up while he's snoring is pretty much impossible. Believe me, I've tried. Naomi shook her head in amusement. Placing a hand on her hip, she eyed the door deliberately. Going somewhere? Toyo asked as he stood, stretching his back to shake off the dulling pain. A friend of mine just messaged me, she replied. He needs some help with a quest back in Tolbana. It's nothing urgent, so I was about to go eat breakfast first before letting you guys know I had to leave. She offered a cheerful smile. But now that you're up, we can both go eat. I'll pay. Toyo cocked his head to the side. Are you saying I look poor to you? She shrugged. That's neither here nor there. Although, I did happen to overhear you saying something about being broke again for the 100th time this week not too long ago. Sighing, Toyo shook the handle of Silverthorn at her before fastening the weapon onto his belt. I already owe you enough, no matter what you say. However, he scratched his morning shadow, I think I see an opportunity here. Naomi lifted an eyebrow curiously. An opportunity for? Lifting a finger through the air matter-of-factly, Toyo replied, to go Dutch, of course. That way, since both of us still feel as though we owe the other, we can both compromise and call it even. After this breakfast, all debt on either side is hitherto void. Sound good? Waving a hand through the air casually, Naomi opened the door, flooding the room in the full morning light. I suppose that's fair. Although, she added, come to think of it, I didn't feel like I owed you anything after giving you Silverthorn. So, following that rule, maybe you should be the one to pay after all. He stepped past her out into the street, shaking his head grimly. Technicalities are just the worst, aren't they? They could keep debates going on forever. Better to avoid them altogether, I find. Dutch it is. Rolling her eyes, Naomi couldn't help but smile as she closed the door behind her. There weren't many restaurants in Treva. As tempting as the smells wafting from each one had been, neither Jay nor Toyo had bothered trying any during their stay. Constantly trying to keep up their funds, they had limited themselves to eating only food dropped by mobs. At the best of times, such cuisine was bland and tasteless. He told as much to Naomi when she asked where they should go. The look on her face was one of pure disbelief. You've lived here for what, 2 weeks now? And you haven't tried any of the food? Toyo blinked. Is it that good? Well, I haven't tried any of the places here in Treva, she admitted, but each floor tends to have a particular theme when it comes to food. Toyo nodded thoughtfully as they began walking up the cobbled street. So what's the theme for this floor? Eggs. Eggs. Naomi nodded happily. Egg-related dishes are the main specialty here on floor 1. Which is perfect for us. Toyo held back the urge to laugh. Why exactly? I hope you realize how that sounded. I could have so easily said something right there. You're welcome in advance. God, I'm such a gentleman. The cheerful beta tester facepalmed dramatically. What the hell are you talking about now? I said it's perfect because we're going for breakfast. What's a proper breakfast without eggs? Toyo pushed a hand through his hair as he grinned mischievously. I couldn't agree more. Chapter 37. Eyeing him suspiciously, Naomi planted her feet squarely in front of him. I'm not moving until you tell me what the hell you're talking about. Throwing up his hands in a gesture of surrender, Toyo smirked as he answered her. The Portuguese breakfast. Expecting a string of insults to follow, Toyo was surprised to see her blink in ignorance instead. What the hell is a Portuguese breakfast? She asked, spitting out the phrase uncomfortably. Toyo's eyes twinkled as he silently praised the gods of perverse humor. That is an excellent question, he began, trying to sound serious as he kept his face composed. To tell you the truth, I don't quite know myself. I guess it's just one of those universal terms everyone says but not many people really understand. Naomi still wasn't moving. Around them, NPCs began exiting their homes and opening up their shops as the virtual sun began rising above the horizon. I don't believe you. She said staunchly, hands still on her hips. Toyo put a hand to his chest solemnly. Seriously, I don't know what it means. You'll have to ask someone who really gets it. I'm telling you, it's just one of those things people say without really getting the origin of the joke itself. Narrowing her gaze, Naomi's eyes threatened to burn a hole through him. Oh yeah, like what? Give me an example. Brushing his hair out of his face, Toyo shrugged impatiently. I don't know. Just certain stuff. Like douchebag, I guess. People say that all the time and no one really knows where it comes from or what it really is. Naomi put a hand to her head in exasperation. Everyone knows what a douchebag is. It's a feminine hygiene product. Toyo leaned in, enthralled by this new information suddenly brought to light before him. Seriously? A hygiene product? What's it do? Shaking her head fervently, Naomi began walking quickly up the street as she said, Nope. Forget it. I don't like where this conversation has ended up and I really don't to be thinking about douchebags while I'm eating. Following after her, Toyo was still curious, but decided he was just happy she still didn't know what the Portuguese breakfast was. She'll ask someone soon, and it'll be awesome. I'm not even gonna lie, Toyo said around a mouthful of scrambled eggs, this was well worth the kernel. Sitting at the opposite side of the small dark oak table, Naomi smiled triumphantly. Told you so. After trying to decide between one of the 3 restaurants in Treva, Toyo had settled on the Friday, more so because he liked the name than anything else. It was the smallest of the 3 restaurants, and located on the edge of town just within the safe zone limits. Upon entering the empty restaurant and seating themselves at the table closest to the door, the NPCs that ran the place had flocked to them without question, bringing menus, drinks, and waiting on their orders. At first, Toyo had schemed along the prices unhappily. When Naomi reminded him that she had offered to pay, he finally went with the scrambled eggs and cheese, with Naomi ordering a large veggie omelette for herself. After a few moments of silence as they ate, Naomi set her empty plate aside and leaned forward tentatively. So you and Jay are brothers? Twirling his fork in the air as he chewed, Toyo took a moment to answer. Well, we're not actually related by blood, if that's what you mean, he began. But as far as we're concerned, he is my brother. And vice versa. Naomi didn't look surprised. Makes sense. It's easy to see how much you guys love each other. But it felt to me like you argue a lot too, and from what I can tell, you have very different personalities. Toyo shrugged. Part of Brotherhood is arguing. We fight a lot because we care. We both want to do whatever it takes to keep the other safe. And I guess, he added under his breath, it might have something to do with our personalities. We are pretty different in the way we go about a lot of things. But there's also lots of things we see eye to eye at instantly. Naomi nodded. Yeah, that sounds about right. But that's good though. You can both see things from different perspectives. Balance each other out and all that. If you like the story, please vote and share it with your friends. If you have an idea, comment. Comment. One comment. Vote. Chapter 38, Chapter 38. Before Toyo could respond, a female NPC stepped forward. Is there anything else I can get either of you? She asked, her friendly, high-pitched voice carrying a trace of the robotic within it. No thank you, Naomi said cheerfully, nothing for me. Toyo held up a hand as he forced himself to swallow the large bite of eggs he had just taken. May I have some more water, please? He asked politely, beating his chest lightly to get the eggs down faster. Absolutely, I'll be right back. With that, the NPC waitress grabbed his empty glass before making for the kitchen. You shouldn't eat so fast, Naomi noted as he cleared his throat. Thanks, I had no idea. Naomi smirked. So snarky. I could say the same of you, he replied defensively. Setting his empty plate aside, it was now Toyo's turn to lean forward. So when you mean arguing, you're talking about last night, right? When Jay brought up the boss raid meeting. Naomi nodded. You didn't say anything that entire time. Toyo continued, locking eyes with her. I'm curious, what's your opinion? Do you think I'm wrong and Jay is right about going to the meeting? She hesitated. Are you asking me to pick a side here? Toyo shook his head. No, I'm asking for your opinion. I need to know if I'm wrong in this. He looked away from her eyes, studying the plate in front of him. Players could die depending on which course of action Jay and I end up taking. You and your brother are pretty rare people. Looking back up at her, Toyo could see the fascination in her face. More than that though, he saw respect. What do you mean? He asked cautiously. Naomi pointed outside the window, where they could see goatmen and wild boars wandering aimlessly not 50 feet away. It was odd seeing the passive mobs so close. There are thousands of players out there, are looking out for themselves. Sure, parties are starting to form, but the players in them only look out for each other. She tapped her chest. Even the beta testers. I mean, I helped make the guidebook, and I wouldn't hesitate to help a player in need. But you and your brother are doing more than that. You both want to go out your way to willingly risk your lives to help the other players. I've heard a lot of people argue and fight in the month we've been here, but what I heard last night between you and Jay was different. Toyo narrowed his gaze as he tried to decipher her meaning. So you're saying that Jay and I are both right? Naomi met his eyes with a deadly serious expression. I'll be honest with you, Toyo. I don't know which of you is right. I don't know which path will keep more people alive, or which is the best course to take. I'm no leader or strategist, and I've never pretended to be. But I do know that there should be more players with the same mindset as you two. She looked away sadly. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you. For a brief moment, Toyo thought he could see shame in her face. By her tone, he guessed she felt guilty about the way she was going about life in Sao. In a way, he understood. While a kind of discrimination seemed to be taking root among the other players towards beta testers, they were still respected as the most knowledgeable players. Undoubtedly, it was that same respect and level of expectation that was putting pressure on Naomi and others like her. She was expected to be among the strongest of the players, and not just in the physical sense. On top of that, she still had to worry about survival just like the rest of them. It was difficult to imagine how she handled such stress. Opening his mouth to say something, Toyo halted when a cry suddenly rose up from outside of the restaurant. Please! Please, God, someone help me! Jumping up out of their seats, Toyo and Naomi both looked out of the window into the woods just outside of Treva. There, just beyond the treeline, they could see a young man with long black hair fighting off at least a dozen plant-like creatures. Even as they watched, more of the plants began appearing from further in the woods. Without another thought, both Toyo and Naomi bolted for the door as his panicked screams only grew in terror. Please, are there any players around here? Please help! Chapter 39. Sprinting outside, Toyo and Naomi both opened their menus as they turned around the corner of the Ferende restaurant, officially exiting the safe zone of the town. Toyo drew his sword at the same moment Naomi equipped her hand axe and metal buckler. Ahead of them, the edge of the forest loomed ominously as they watched the young man obliterate several of the plant-like creatures with a short sword. The plants, which looked like huge yellow flowers stacked on top of 8 bony legs, were completely unknown to Toyo. As they drew closer, the young man spotted them. Before he could react, however, a metallic tongue appeared from the center of one of the plants and lashed out, knocking the player down. Putting his hands over his head, the man lay there helplessly. "Please just fucking kill them!" he screamed. "Get up!" Toyo yelled at the top of his lungs. "Get up and run!" Rather than answer, the man instead began to shake violently. All around him, the plant creatures rushed forward to finish him. "No!" Toyo roared. Desperate to close the distance in time, he bent his legs and sprang forward, launching himself through the air directly towards the downed player. Smashing into the creature nearest the man, Toyo didn't bother trying to land on his feet and instead swung Silverthorn in an arc around him as he fell. Pixelated fragments exploding all around him, he broke his fall by rolling forward. Jumping back up, Toyo tore his blade through the air before him, instantly destroying 2 more creatures as they jumped at him. Twisting his sword hand as the creatures swarmed him, Toyo hacked off several of the monster's skeletal limbs, but he couldn't stop all of them. Multiple blows knocking him off balance, Toyo struggled to right himself as his HP began to deteriorate. Before he could prepare any kind of counter-attack, Toyo found himself surrounded by a mist of exploding creatures as Naomi tore into the fray, her axe coated in a golden hue as she executed multiple sword skills within the span of several seconds. Keeping her shield held high as she attacked, Naomi effortlessly blocked whatever attacks managed to get past her onslaught. Advancing deeper into the horde of plant creatures charging forward from the depths of the forest, Naomi had given Toyo a moment to catch his breath. Ignoring the urge to join her, Toyo nonetheless maintained a death grip on Silverthorn as he ran up to the downed player. "I told you to get the fuck up!" Toyo yelled as he yanked the shaking man up off the ground. "Can't." The player gasped. Wincing, it appeared to take everything he had to lift his arm slightly in the direction of the battle between Naomi and the mobs. "Sei seizure, atta." Toyo didn't wait for the man to finish. Splitting one of the creatures in half as it snuck past Naomi and targeted him, Toyo accessed his menu, cursing his shaking hands for slowing him down. "Naomi, they've got an impairment attack!" he shouted as he equipped his one and only teleport crystal. Holding it above the downed player, Toyo tried to keep his voice clear as he spoke the activation. "Teleport, Treva." In an instant, the shaking man on the ground had disappeared. Finally able to rejoin the girl protecting him, Toyo brandished Silverthorn as he allowed his fury and adrenaline to overwhelm him. Amidst the chaos of battle, it was possible Naomi hadn't heard his warning. Though now far ahead of him and cut off by the plant creatures, he could still hear her battle cry as she brought her axe down again and again upon her assailants. Charging forward, Toyo screamed as he tore into the back ranks of the monsters, Silverthorn ripping them apart as he swung the blade all around him. Lost in his rage, fueled by his fear of being forced to watch yet another player die in front of him, Toyo had already cut down 5 of the creatures before they managed to turn and target him. Without slowing down, Toyo pressed his attack. Carving a vicious path into the ranks of the beasts, Toyo found himself ripping off their yellow flower heads with his empty right hand while at the same time knocking aside the sharp, skeletal limbs with Silverthorn. The monsters were dying so quickly that before the digital shards of the first victims of his advance had even begun to clear, a dozen more were dead. If you like the story, please vote, give Sprinting Outside. Toyo and Naomi both opened their menus as they turned around the corner of the Ferrande restaurant, officially exiting the safe zone of the town. Toyo drew his sword at the same moment Naomi equipped her hand axe and metal buckler. Ahead of them, the edge of the forest loomed ominously as they watched the young man obliterate several of the plant-like creatures with a short sword. The plants, which looked like huge yellow flowers stacked on top of 8 bony legs, were completely unknown to Toyo. As they drew closer, the young man spotted them. Before he could react, however, a metallic tongue appeared from the center of one of the plants and lashed out, knocking the player down. Putting his hands over his head, the man lay there helplessly. "Please just fucking kill them!" he screamed. "Get up!" Toyo yelled at the top of his lungs. "Get up and run!" Rather than answer, the man instead began to shake violently. All around him, the plant creatures rushed forward to finish him. "No!" Toyo roared. Desperate to close the distance in time, he bent his legs and sprang forward, launching himself through the air directly towards the downed player. Smashing into the creature nearest the man, Toyo didn't bother trying to land on his feet and instead swung Silverthorn in an arc around him as he fell. Pixelated fragments exploding all around him, he broke his fall by rolling forward. Jumping back up, Toyo tore his blade through the air before him, instantly destroying 2 more creatures as they jumped at him. Twisting his sword hand as the creatures swarmed him, Toyo hacked off several of the monster's skeletal limbs, but he couldn't stop all of them. Multiple blows knocking him off balance, Toyo struggled to right himself as his HP began to deteriorate. Before he could prepare any kind of counter-attack, Toyo found himself surrounded by a mist of exploding creatures as Naomi tore into the fray, her axe coated in a golden hue as she executed multiple sword skills within the span of several seconds. Keeping her shield held high as she attacked, Naomi effortlessly blocked whatever attacks managed to get past her onslaught. Advancing deeper into the horde of plant creatures charging forward from the depths of the forest, Naomi had given Toyo a moment to catch his breath. Ignoring the urge to join her, Toyo nonetheless maintained a death grip on Silverthorn as he ran up to the downed player. "I told you to get the fuck up!" Toyo yelled as he yanked the shaking man up off the ground. "Can't." The player gasped. Wincing, it appeared to take everything he had to lift his arm slightly in the direction of the battle between Naomi and the mobs. "Sei seizure, atta." Toyo didn't wait for the man to finish. Splitting one of the creatures in half as it snuck past Naomi and targeted him, Toyo accessed his menu, cursing his shaking hands for slowing him down. "Naomi, they've got an impairment attack," he shouted as he equipped his one and only teleport crystal. Holding it above the downed player, Toyo tried to keep his voice clear as he spoke the activation. "Teleport, Treva." In an instant, the shaking man on the ground had disappeared. Finally able to rejoin the girl protecting him, Toyo brandished Silverthorn as he allowed his fury and adrenaline to overwhelm him. Amidst the chaos of battle, it was possible Naomi hadn't heard his warning. Though now far ahead of him and cut off by the plant creatures, he could still hear her battle cry as she brought her axe down again and again upon her assailants. Charging forward, Toyo screamed as he tore into the back ranks of the monsters, Silverthorn ripping them apart as he swung the blade all around him. Lost in his rage, fueled by his fear of being forced to watch yet another player die in front of him, Toyo had already cut down 5 of the creatures before they managed to turn and target him. Without slowing down, Toyo pressed his attack. Carving a vicious path into the ranks of the beasts, Toyo found himself ripping off their yellow flower heads with his empty right hand while at the same time knocking aside the sharp, skeletal limbs with Silverthorn. The monsters were dying so quickly that before the digital shards of the first victims of his advance had even begun to clear, a dozen more were dead. Chapter 40. Hacking off all 6 limbs of one of the monsters with a sweep of his sword, Toyo winced against the sharp pain from another behind him as it slashed his shoulder blade open. Spinning around to face it, he tore his blade through 2 more of them and received 3 more wounds before getting his vengeance, snapping the creature's stem-like neck with his right hand. Yet for each creature he killed, more simply charged forward to take their place. With his health halfway gone, Toyo could feel the tables beginning to turn. Winded from the fierce and endless battle, his attacks were beginning to slow. As if emboldened by his growing vulnerability, the sea of plant creatures pressed their attacks as they thickened all around him, many toppling over each other just to strike at him with their legs. Yelling in pain as multiple limbs began tearing through his leather armor, it was all Toyo could do to parry the attacks with his sword wherever he could. Seizing hold of one of the creatures nearest him with his right hand, Toyo made to snap the stem of its neck, only to realize he no longer had the strength. Still holding onto the creature, Toyo suddenly saw a tongue appear from within the center of its flower-like face. The impairment attack. He realized in horror. Before the thing could lash out with its tongue, Toyo strengthened his grip on its throat to keep it from escaping. Launching Silverthorn forward with his other hand, Toyo rammed the blade into the center of the monster's face. Even as it died, a shrill shriek escaped the creature's throat, sending a chill up Israel's spine and almost causing him to drop his sword and cover his ears in pain. Suddenly, all around him, the other creatures stopped in their tracks and began to tremble, each one screaming in unison as they shuddered. What the hell? Taking advantage of the momentary lapse in the fighting, Toyo scrambled through his menu, quickly equipping a health crystal from his inventory. Heal! He shouted. His HP rose immediately, but only enough to get him just back into the green. Before he could do anything else, the creatures stopped trembling and resumed their attack as if nothing had happened. Again fighting with everything he had just to keep the skeletal limbs away from him, Toyo quickly began trying to think up a plan. Cleaving through the body of a particularly aggressive plant creature, Toyo was dismayed to see two more of them open their faces, their disgusting tongues preparing to strike on either side of him. I won't be able to stop both of them. At that moment, he heard Naomi's voice somewhere behind him. Take the one on your left. Without hesitation, Toyo swung his blade at an upward slant as he pivoted to the left, splitting the creature, and its tongue, in two. Turning, Toyo saw Naomi bury her axe in the second monster's face even as she caught several limbs on her shield. Get ready! Toyo yelled. Glancing at him in confusion, Naomi jumped back when the remaining creatures again started trembling and screaming in unison. Use your sword skills! Toyo shouted as his own blade suddenly exploded in red and blue flames. Every single one. Nodding, Naomi's axe again took on a golden color as she charged forward, decapitating 3 of the creatures in a single strike. When the monsters again recovered from their strange trembling, Toyo and Naomi halted their assault and switched to the defensive, covering each other from enemy attacks, all the while waiting for the creatures to attempt their impairment attack again. It was in this way that the tide finally began to turn. Each time one of the plant creatures attacked with its special ability, Toyo and Naomi would target it, and in the ensuing helplessness of the remaining creatures, they would unleash a barrage of sword skills, wiping out dozens at a time. Again and again, the monsters attacked, and each time, the two players cut them down. Glancing up as he mindlessly swung his sword once more, Toyo was shocked to see that there were no more monsters. Looking around, he saw and heard nothing but the ragged panting of Naomi and the choked gasps of his own breathing. After what had felt like an eternity of brutal, mindless fighting, the battle was over. Every single monster had been destroyed.
Thanks for listening.